All right, so in this explainer, we're going to deconstruct a pretty provocative argument that's been making the rounds online. It makes a direct link between silence and being responsible for violence. Our goal here is just to map out its logic step by step so we can see exactly how it's built.
And here it is. This is the core statement the entire argument is built around. It frames silence not as some neutral, passive thing, but as an active choice that has really serious consequences. This is the conclusion, and now we're going to trace back the steps the argument takes to get here.
So where does an argument like this even begin? Well, it all kicks off with an observation. The source claims to have identified a predictable pattern, something they see happening over and over again in public discourse right after certain events. So here's the pattern they lay out. It's a three-step sequence. First, a terror attack happens that gets linked to Muslims. Then, almost immediately, the source says the media focus shifts to the peaceful majority. And finally, they claim that anyone who questions this narrative gets quickly shut down and labeled an Islamophobe. This alleged pattern is presented as the crucial starting point for the whole argument. This observation about the peaceful majority becomes the real pivot point for the entire argument. It's where the source goes from just observing the narrative to directly questioning it. And that leads to this, the central challenge of the argument. Instead of just accepting the premise, the source directly asks about the role and the actions of this so-called peaceful majority. This question is designed to completely shift the focus, not from whether they exist, but to their supposed inaction. The argument then builds on that skepticism. It asks, are they speaking up? And as evidence for this line of questioning, the source points to the fact that attacks just keep on happening in different countries. The implication is pretty clear. If this majority were actually doing something, maybe these events wouldn't be happening. This questioning leads directly to the core claim of the entire argument. It's an accusation of silence, and more importantly, what that silence signifies. Now, this is absolutely crucial. It all comes down to how silence is defined here. It's not presented as being neutral or just not getting involved. Within the logic of this argument, being silent when you see something it calls evil is explicitly defined as an act of protection for the people doing the violence. The argument then lays out this very stark choice. It creates a simple dichotomy. You either speak up and confront the issue, or you stay silent. And in this view, staying silent is framed as being the exact same thing as actively protecting those committing violence. You'll notice there is no middle ground offered. From that core claim, the argument then moves to the stakes. It lays out what it sees as the very, very serious consequences of this alleged silence and the public conversation around it. And here's where the source really voices a frustration. It argues that its perspective, which it just calls common sense and seeing things for what they are, is being dismissed and relabeled by society as a form of bigotry. This is a key part of its warning about where the public debate is heading. And the argument wraps up with a pretty dire prediction. It states that if people continue to refuse to tell the truth, as defined by the source's perspective, of course, the ultimate consequence will be the loss of more innocent lives. The stakes are presented as incredibly high. So now the full logical path of the argument is really clear. It kicks off with an observation about a media pattern, pivots to a question about the peaceful majority, and then lands on the conclusion that their silence is a form of complicity with life-or-death consequences. And that leaves us with the central tension of the argument, all framed as one final question. The source believes it's simply seeing things for what they are, but feels this view as being labeled as bigotry. The argument really forces a confrontation with that question, leaving you to consider where exactly is that line drawn.